Mother's Day is always exhausting for a farmer florist. I grow the flowers and I also sell them because not only am I growing them and having to deal with all of that piece of it, I'm also harvesting them, I'm arranging them, I'm selling them, so I'm dealing with marketing and sales, and so it's a lot. And we're also still planting at this time of year. So those are the downsides of Mother's Day. I love Mother's Day, but it is crazy around here. The best part of Mother's Day for me is that it means it's time for me to direct sow all my flowers, because in my zone, Mother's Day is our unofficial last frost date. So that means I can hit the ground running and get my seeds in the ground. So as I've been doing this, I have learned certain flowers that prefer to be direct sown. That is, they don't like to be started inside. And the times that I do start them inside, I regret it because they don't do as well. They really prefer to be started directly in the ground, which is great if you don't have a greenhouse, or maybe you're running a little bit behind this year on seed starting. Now, as we talk about these, keep in mind that I'm specifically referencing direct sow flowers that are good for cutting, because there are other direct sow flowers that I still will start from seed, but I don't like to use them from cutting. Nasturtium is a great example. It's a beautiful flower. Personally, I don't use it for cutting. I know there are some people who do. I just don't. There are moths behind me freaking out. Anyway, so again, bear that in mind, that when I'm talking about the ones that I like to direct sow, I'm talking about for cut flowers. I'm also going to talk about some of the ones that I don't direct sow anymore for cut flowers. So these are still plants that I still grow, but not with a cutting garden emphasis. The three that I always direct sow and I love to use, and you could honestly do an entire cutting garden just from these varieties. Different colors, different shades, different successions of these plants would give you a full season of cutting very easy flowers. Number one is zinnia, and I'm sure you're not surprised to hear me say that. Zinnias I love because not only do they have a really great germination rate, so they're easy to start, they grow very quickly in the ground, and they don't like root disturbance. So these are one that I don't feel guilty about not starting inside because they don't like to be started inside. They really dislike root disturbance, and what I've found happens if I start zinnias inside and transplant them is they might do okay, but what I notice is that the percentage of double zinnias, which are the zinnias that have lots of layers to their petals instead of just one layer of petal, is less. So if I start them inside, I get fewer of those double ruffled zinnia that I love and that look fancier and more beautiful. And I get more of the single petal varieties that are a little bit more boring and they just don't command as much attention. Some of my favorite zinnia varieties for cutting include the Oklahoma variety, and I also like the Queenie Lime series, the Queenie Lime Red, Queenie Lime Orange, Queenie Lime Peach. I love them all. They have kind of a dustier color, and so I really like those ones. So again, direct sow them, bury them about 1/4 of an inch under the soil. I usually do 2 per hole, and my spacing for zinnias is about 9 inches because they do get pretty big and bushy. Make sure that you're pinching them early on to help encourage bushy growth and more stems. You'll want to make sure that you're succession planting your zinnias. So start a new zinnia seed about every 2 to 3 weeks because that's going to extend your bloom time. Zinnias tend to kind of fade out as they produce a lot of blooms and you're cutting from them. They tend to not bloom as well toward the end of the season. So if you do 2 or 3 successions of them, you're going to be happier with the results. The number 2 variety that I always direct sow, I never start inside, and I love to direct sow because it's quick and easy, is the sunflower. And sunflowers are often thought of as kind of common and boring, but there are so many different varieties, especially if you're looking into, for example, the pro-cut varieties, which just grow one single stem, and they're pollenless, so they're better for cutting because they don't make a mess all over your table, and you use tablecloths all over your tablecloth, or if you're getting married, all over your wedding dress, that pollen can stain. So the pollenless varieties are really great for that. We do still grow pollen varieties for the pollinators. We also grow some of Sunflower Steve's varieties, which are multi-layered, multi-petaled, ruffled. They have lots of beautiful color variations to them. My favorite to grow personally are the Pro-Cut White Light and the Pro-Cut Plum. I just really like the kind of neutralness that they bring. I'm not a huge bright yellow sunflower person. I kind of like the off colors. So those whites and the plum color sunflowers are really my style. Sunflowers are also one that you're going to want to succession plant. I usually start sunflower seeds every 2 weeks and I space them really tightly. So even though you'll hear people say space about 6 to 9 inches for sunflowers, I actually do 2 to 3 inches apart because it encourages a shorter stem and a smaller bloom. So I'm able to not only fit more of them in, they don't take over my garden and they don't take over a bouquet. Sometimes when you have a huge sunflower bloom, it just commands too much attention and then it's really hard to work with. So I like personally the little bit smaller stems and smaller blooms for the sunflowers. The third variety that I like to directly sow into the garden for the purposes of cutting is hyacinth bean. And hyacinth bean is a really beautiful climbing runner style bean. It actually creates a edible bean. I think you have to treat it a little bit differently when cooking it, so double check on that. But we use it for cutting. It creates a beautiful spike flower before it turns into the bean, and it also creates this really long, luscious foliage. So we can use it in 3 different ways. We can use it in the bloom spike form, we can use it in the bean form as kind of a textural element in a centerpiece, and then we can also use the vine foliage, so it's a great filler, kind of spiller effect in a centerpiece arrangement. I really love the hyacinth bean because it's kind of multifaceted. It comes in a couple different colors. It comes in a burgundy purple, and it also comes in a white that's called silver moon hyacinth bean. They're both beautiful. They are very fast climbers, so if you're looking for something that's going to cover an arbor or a trellis, hyacinth bean is a really great one. It's ornamental in the garden. You can use it as cutting, and it actually has a pretty decent vase life, and we will often use kind of some veggies mixed in. So tomato greenery is another one that we'll sometimes use as filler in our centerpieces because it's different and it's interesting. Hyacinth bean you'll just sow once right at your last frost, and you don't have to do succession planting of it. Just let it grow all season and take cuts from it throughout the season. So those are the 3 that I prefer to direct sow in the cutting garden. Now there are still a few flowers that I direct sow, but I really don't use them for cutting. And I've talked about one of them before, and that one is cosmos. And cosmos I just don't grow a lot of anymore because they don't have a great vase life. They have somewhat of a vase life if you cut them at the right stage. Not the best vase life. And they also get very large. They can get out of control. They get a lot of blooms, and so they can get weedy easily. If you don't keep up with deadheading them, you're going to be dropping seeds all over your garden, and they can be borderline invasive in some areas of North America. So that's why cosmos is not one that I really direct sow anymore as a cut flower, even though it's one that I've recommended, and we recommended it in the Easy Cut Garden Plan, because if you are someone who struggles with growing things, cosmos will give you a lot of confidence. You can absolutely use cosmos as cut flowers. I'm not saying that you can't. I'm just saying they're one that I don't really use anymore. But they are an easy direct sow. If you want to direct sow them, I would recommend also succession planting your cosmos. That is, start a new batch of them about every 2 to 3 weeks, just like you are with your zinnias and your sunflowers. I do still grow some cosmos, but I only grow about 6 or 7 plants, and that's it, because that's all I can keep up with deadheading. The second one that is often recommended as a direct sow flower in the cutting garden is calendula. And I do love calendula, don't get me wrong, I love it, but I don't love it as a cut flower because it has a sticky stem. It's kind of unpleasant to harvest. It also goes to seed really quickly, so if you miss the bloom period, it goes to seed, it drops seed everywhere. Keeping up with deadheading it is very time consuming. So I'm not a huge fan of calendula for the cut garden, but I do grow it for its herbal benefits. And it is part of our herbal cutting garden because specifically of the herbal benefits. Our calendula salve uses those calendula petals. We also dry and use the calendula petals in teas, but I don't really like them that much for a cut garden. That's just me. You can absolutely use them. Don't be insulted if you love calendula. This is just my own. But you can direct sow them. They will grow really quickly. Direct sow them right about your last frost, and you don't have to succession plant them, but you do have to keep up with deadheading them. And last up on the list of ones that are often recommended as a direct sow flower, but we don't use as a cutting flower, are nasturtium. And nasturtium is one that we do grow, but we grow it as a trap crop. I also grow it because I like the flowers in my cocktails, but that's a whole nother video. Growing it as a trap crop means that we are growing it usually at the base of plants that tend to be attacked by pests. So we're actually experimenting with growing it at the base of our dahlias this year. We're going to be growing it in our tomatoes. We've grown it in our tomatoes before, and it's worked quite well. The downside is that the nasturtium tends to get quite eaten up because it's serving as a trap crop. So usually our earwigs tend to go for that nasturtium, which is fine, but it means that we can't really use it as a cut. The other downside in my climate of nasturtium is that they just don't get that tall. In other climates, I know they get quite large. In my climate, they just don't get that big, and so we're limited on using them in arrangements. But I do love nasturtium. We absolutely grow it. We just don't grow it necessarily for the cut garden. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope that you are getting ready to direct sow some things into your garden. Now remember, if you want to start a cutting garden, go back to our video on how to plan an easy cut flower garden. That's going to give you really good essentials to get started. But if you want to just start with these three, the zinnias, the sunflowers, and the hyacinth bean, that will give you a nice variety to cut from throughout the season, and it's going to be easy to start from seed. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and please have a wonderful Mother's Day. I hope that you get to spend some time doing whatever it is that brings you peace and joy, and we will see you back soon at the farm.